Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel. I hope everybody had an interesting weekend. I know I did. So much going on this weekend, wasn't there? There was the U.S. Open. Dustin Johnson finally broke through and won his first major. As I posted on my personal Facebook site today, Dustin Johnson won the U.S. Open. The English language lost the post-game interview. Dustin Johnson may be the nicest guy in the world. And I don't know him. I probably never will know him, never meet him. I know that he's well-liked by his fellow players on the tour. But, man, does he butcher the English language. Oh, my gosh. So that's why I said that. I'm not the hugest Dustin Johnson fan. You know that I'm a Phil Mickelson fan, probably because Phil and I are kind of grown up with him being a golfer, and he did not play well. Didn't even make the cut. And I have nothing personally against Dustin Johnson, but I will admit that I wasn't necessarily rooting for him yesterday. It's nice that an American won it, but, that's just me. Then you had the NBA Finals. That has to be one of the biggest upsets in recent NBA history, maybe even in sports in general, with the Cavaliers coming back to beat the Warriors in a 7-game series. And then on top of that, Cleveland getting its first professional sports championship in 52 years. And the reason that is so noteworthy is because they have an NBA team, they have a baseball team, they have a football team, and they've gone 52 years, without getting anything. So I guess I guess I'm happy for Cleveland, even though Cleveland should remember that you're still just Cleveland. Then my trivia team won the championship once again out of 22 trivia seasons that have happened at Fat Cat Tavern in Largo, where we go. Which is over the span of about 4 years. Out of 22 seasons of trivia, which a season, like I said, is about 8 weeks. 8 to 10 weeks, it varies. We've won 16 of them. So, and I think we've come in second 4 times. Yeah, it's we have a lot of smart people on our team. A lot of people who have expertises in different areas of knowledge. And so we won. Trivia came from way behind to win this season, which was pretty cool. And what else did I do? What else happened this weekend? I practiced my disc golf a little bit, did something to my back. It's feeling fine today. I think it's going to be fine, but I just think I worked it a little too hard on Saturday. Sometimes I forget that I'm 45 years old. But the weekend went fast. And on top of everything else, myself and my co-host Melissa Bridges recorded another America's Missing podcast. This week, the case was Jesse Ross, who disappeared in Chicago in November of 2006. And already, in just a few hours of posting it on Podomatic.com, we had over 200 downloads. So we're very excited about that. We're going to continue to make that show popular. It's a topic that Melissa and I both have a passion for. And you'll be able to hear those episodes. They're now playing on the Encore channel here on Red State Talk Radio on the weekends. So you can be looking for that. So we're excited. We already figured out the next few shows that we're going to do, and we're going to have to do our research and put all our information together. But I really enjoyed doing that show with her, and I hope it gets very popular because we enjoyed doing it. Let's get to the show. I can start in a variety of places. There's so many political things also that happened over the last couple days. But something I've been meaning to talk about, and we can kind of mix it in with a few other topics for this show, is does everybody remember Ted Cruz? Remember him? He wanted to get the Republican nomination, that senator from Texas that everybody seemed to dislike, and is other senators didn't care for him, and he couldn't get a lot of endorsements, and gave it his best shot, but then dropped out after Indiana. Remember Ted Cruz? Remember him? And do you remember what I said going back to, was that in April? It seems like, I can't tell you how fast the days go, months go. I cannot even begin to explain it to you. But that was back in April that he lost Indiana. And that night when he lost Indiana, he dropped out of the race. He suspended his campaign. And everybody was so shocked. Well, I can't believe that he did that. That means that Trump is probably going to get the nomination. And what did I tell you on this show? You can go back and check it. In fact, I urge you to do so. I said that Ted Cruz doesn't do anything without a plan. He's like what Fred Thompson's character says in The Hunt for Red October. He goes, "Hey boy, Russians don't do anything without a plan." You can go back and check that. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Well, Ted Cruz, he's kind of like that. Nothing with him, I think, is just a spur of the moment. And maybe that's why some people dislike him. He always seems so calculating and trying to think 2 or 3 steps ahead of everybody, and seems to be a little bit manipulative because of all of that. But I told you back then that he was not suspending. This was not the kind of suspension of a campaign like all of the others, like Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush or Carly Fiorina or anything else. I told you that maybe it could have been that he figured out the only way we're going to get the people are going to get to see the real Donald Trump, the Donald Trump that Ted Cruz thought he knew, was for Ted Cruz to take himself out of the conversation. And then, of course, John Kasich did shortly after that. And allow everybody to see Donald Trump for who he was. And the stats show, the polls show, once again, if you want to believe them, that since April, Trump's popularity has gone down. Even though it's just now Donald Trump against whoever the Democrats are going to nominate, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. That would seem to be a pretty good fight that Republicans would take most of the time. It seems like Donald Trump is blowing it, and I think Ted Cruz knew that back then. Because until then, Donald Trump could, I guess you could say successfully, demonize Ted Cruz for not being an American citizen and all this stuff about his father being involved in the assassination of JFK and Lion Ted and all that. You'll notice that Donald Trump hasn't had that much success so far doing the same thing to Hillary or Bernie, has he? Now, I would say it's because in many ways, Donald Trump identifies with Hillary and Bernie. And we know that Donald Trump has been pretty much a liberal Democrat his whole life. So I think that's a large part of it. And I think, once again, that Ted Cruz knew this. But he had a hard time showing that to people as long as he was involved in the nomination process, because he knew that all Donald Trump was going to do was to continue to pick on Ted. So Ted took himself totally out of the conversation. I think he was also thinking, probably, hey, you know what, Republicans? If this is the nominee that you want, you can have him. I know I'm a part of the Republican Party, and I'm a senator from Texas, and I've been a Republican my whole life, but people, if this is the nominee you want, you deserve to have him. You deserve to see who he really is. And this is what's been going on for 2 months now. And it's not been very positive for the Republican Party. The reason I bring this all up is that now you can see in many different places a lot of talk about delegates who are getting a little weak-kneed. Delegates who are supposed to, although there is no law saying so, who are supposed to vote for Donald Trump in the nomination process when we get to the convention, who are now having second thoughts. You can find stories at National Review, The New Americana, all sorts of different places where that news is out there. And dare I say it, I think this is something that Ted Cruz knew was going to happen. It's also why you see, if you've been paying enough close attention to stories out there, and I do because research is allowed for this show, that Ted Cruz is very quietly out there doing this, doing that, giving this speech, giving that speech. He's been, of course, very vocal about what happened in Orlando, if you can believe it. That's been over a week ago now. He's just keeping himself on the periphery of the news, just in case. Because, I don't know Ted Cruz. It may very well be that his personality and my personality might not get along very well. It's just hard to say. All I know is that I like a large portion of his political positions. And I've told you that I haven't given any money, never gave any money to his campaign, didn't tell any of you to vote for him. I told you I did. I'm not putting a bumper sticker on my car or anything like that. But it seems to me that Ted Cruz, despite what your average Republican may think of him, knows the American electorate a lot better than Donald Trump does. Even though Donald Trump portrays himself and seems to have gotten a lot of average Americans to vote for him as being the average guy, just the average blue-collar American. He's been able to pull that off. But it seems like Ted Cruz knows where things are going. And I think he knew that when he'd drop out, that Donald Trump's numbers would plummet, as they have, and that the delegates themselves at some point would start to feel pressure to say, you know what, this is something that I had this conversation with this friend of mine I always bring up about political issues. I asked him, what do you think the threshold is? I asked him last week, what do you think the threshold is? How low would it have to go before the Republican Party were to dump Trump and to say this just isn't worth it? Now, this friend of mine, he's more of a company man than I am. He's still part of the Republican Party. In fact, he told me recently that being chairman of the GOP would be kind of a dream job for him, and that does not surprise me at all, knowing this guy the way I do. And I say that in a very positive way. In fact, I think this friend of mine, if he had the credentials to get that position, I think he'd do a fine job. Even though I'm not a part of the Republican Party anymore, I think he'd do a fine job, and I think that he'd probably do a better job than Reince Priebus has done, or any of the other recent chairmen of the Republican Party. But this friend of mine, he is kind of a company man when it comes to that. So he says that he doesn't think there's any threshold. He thinks that you just have to keep with whoever has gotten enough delegates, who has gotten enough votes, because that's what the rules say. And in fact, to use my own words, I'd say that this guy my friend sounds like he just wants everybody to go down with the ship. But I think part of it with this friend of mine is that he is hesitant to believe all the news that is out there. Mm-hmm. He's still thinking that there is hope, and I guess there's always hope. So, but I don't think that there are many within the Republican Party in those decision-making positions who think like my friend do. And in fact, they're probably thinking they have a lot more to lose from Donald Trump getting his butt kicked if that's going to happen than this friend of mine does. This friend of mine's just out there in the private sector. He doesn't have anything to do with any leadership in the party. But my friend didn't seem to think there would be any threshold. I happen to believe that there is a threshold. There is a number, a poll number, that if Donald Trump were to hit it and they were to believe it, that they would start looking around and saying, we cannot afford to get our butt kicked like this in November. This friend of mine, in this discussion we had, brought up Barry Goldwater. Well, they went with Barry Goldwater even though it looked like, he was going to lose and get killed in the 1964 election. And I told him, I think that's different. It's different for a couple different reasons. First of all, Barry Goldwater was running against an incumbent. Yes, an incumbent had only been in for less than a year. But he was running against an incumbent. Lyndon Baines Johnson was a popular president. This was before, the height of Vietnam, of course, 1964. We were just sending a few troops over there at that point. And if you don't know, Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, got so unpopular that he didn't even try to run for re-election in 1968. He bowed out. But in 1963-64, after JFK got shot, Johnson was a very popular guy. And the Republicans were probably thinking, no matter who we nominate, they're probably going to lose. Barry Goldwater won the nomination. We just knew we were going to lose anyway, first of all. Second of all, Barry Goldwater was a person who foretold a direction that the Republican Party was going. Not to mention that he got Ronald Reagan deliver the Time for Choosing speech, which in my opinion is one of the greatest non-wartime speeches in the 20th century, if not in American history. And it foretold something that was coming. Granted, it took a little while. We had to get through the Nixon years and Watergate and Gerald Ford, but it foretold something that was coming within the Republican Party that was changing it in a positive direction. All right? And that also could be the reason the Republican leadership decided to stick with Barry Goldwater. With Donald Trump, you have none of that. If we're going to start talking about that threshold, well, if they're stick with Barry Goldwater in 1964, and I grant it's over 50 years ago, most of those people weren't even alive anymore. They'll stick with Barry Goldwater in 1964, well, then it makes sense to stick with Trump now. I just don't see any relationship between the two at all. There is no incumbent now. The Democrats are going to nominate a person, either a man or a woman, who have so many flaws. If flaws were holes, they'd look like sieves. So that's a big deal. And then Donald Trump is not a what do we want to call it? A transformational figure. He's not a guy who is changing the Republican Party. In fact, a large majority of the Republican Party is rejecting him. They don't like him. They don't like his politics. They don't like the flip-flopping. A lot of people realize that he's was a liberal Democrat most of his life, then just suddenly has decided to be a Republican. Something that Barry Goldwater, and he had flaws too, at least he was Republican. At least. And was an honorable man. Donald Trump is none of those things. If you look at the Republican Party 20 years from now, wherever it goes, it's not going to be filled with a bunch of Donald Trumps. And that's what I've tried to tell you, that the party has attached itself to a fad, a reality show. Whereas Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan talking for him were not reality show people. They were men of character. Ronald Reagan being honest, very honest about his change, something that Donald Trump has not done. Donald Trump changed because he was an opportunist. Ronald Reagan, in being embraced by the Republican Party, the reason he was embraced is because he had a genuine change of heart. As if he said, the party left him, he didn't leave them. So we can't look at something way back when a Republican really, the last time that a Republican really got his butt kicked, I mean, granted, Mitt Romney and John McCain didn't do very well, but you'd have to go back to 1964 to see a Republican president who really, really, really lost. Still, I see so many differences between the two. And I would urge you to check that out as well. Like I said, I with me personally, and I think this is the way most conservatives think, we don't mind losing on principle. If we are going to vote for somebody and we're going to lose, it's going to be somebody who reflects our values. Granted, you're never going to find any politician you agree with 100% of the time. But is that man or woman decent person? And do you agree with that person about 70% of the time? That's about as good as you're going to get in American politics. And we're willing to lose with a person like that. Mm-hmm. Some people just want to win at any cost. And I don't think we as conservatives, more and more, I think that we're going against that. And what we see now is an opportunity to win, and the Republicans are going to lose. Donald Trump is going to lose, not on principle, but just because. Just because. Because Donald Trump surely does not reflect the values of a majority of the Republican Party, even though, like I said, I'm not part of it anymore. So it's just going to lose because, we're putting up the Bee Gees, and whereas really what would prefer are the Rolling Stones. Bee Gees were popular for about 4 years, 5 years, between 1976 and 1981. Rolling Stones have been popular since the 1960s, and they're popular today. They sell out today. They're not a fad. They've been around, even though I'm not the hugest Rolling Stones fan. They are not a fad. Would rather lose with the Rolling Stones than with the Bee Gees. Donald Trump is the Bee Gees. And there's too many people telling us that, disco's going to be around forever, don't you know? Just like somebody was probably saying in 1977, going to all the nightclubs, wearing the polyester, dancing on the floor with the spinning ball and on roller skates or something. Yeah, disco's here to stay, man. Yeah, but 1981, it was gone. It was gone. Meanwhile, those groups who stuck to their guitars and real music continued on. They lived through that time, came out the other side, and continued to be successful. The Who, the Rolling Stones, Kiss, Led Zeppelin, of course, John Bonham died, all that, they stuck around, and they're still around today. Bee Gees, after 1981, 80, after Saturday Night Fever, where'd they go? Made a lot of money. Made a couple appearances here and there, but they were never the same. They were fad. And you have to be a student of history and politics and understand the American people and the history of our country to be able to discern which is which. We just don't have enough people that do that or have the ability to do that. So, Ted Cruz, getting back to him, the way I started this, he's one of these guys that doesn't fall for fads. As a good conservative, he shouldn't, and he doesn't. But he said, he would have been that guy in 1976 in the recording industry saying, you know what? If they want to put all this money into disco, okay, go ahead. Good luck with that. I'm going to stick with these bands that have been popular for the last 10 years, thinking that I can continue to sell their records for them and get them, market them. And some point, this disco thing is going to go away. And it did. You just have to be patient. Now, that's just the recording industry. Doesn't mean anything. Politics do mean something. But I'm glad to hear that these delegates, maybe they're finally realizing that Donald Trump is disco. That the more people start to be around it more and more and more, the more they say, you know what, I'm ready for something else. What's the 80s going to bring? Bring in a little techno, hair bands, Madonna, Michael Jackson, although he kind of got started in the disco era, Prince. All these groups. Iron Maiden, can't forget them. That will continue to live on, whereas disco, well, it's just going to come to a morbid death. Once again, I hope Donald Trump lives to be 100 years old. I'm just hoping his political career ends in the next month and a half. So let's move on to something else. We can learn something, it's just talking about conservatives. We can learn something about what Democrats are doing in response to the Orlando shooting. 4 gun control bills were introduced in Congress today. They all are going to fail miserably. I've told you the reason I think this is that I think at their core, these Democrats really aren't technically anti-gun. They just don't want Republicans and conservatives to have guns. They want to have guns. They don't want Republicans and conservatives to have guns. That's what I continue to believe. Just like I believe that Barack Obama would pull out the nuclear arsenal if ISIS were the Tea Party. But that did not stop. Even though these bills are going to get voted down, they have no chance of passing. None. 0 chance. They do it to make a point and to raise their profile with their constituents who don't know any better, that this is just a fallacy. Conservatives should pay close attention to this. Now, on our side, our conservative lawmakers who exist in Congress, they should continue to craft and bring to the floor conservative laws or the repealing of laws, even if they think they're going to get voted down. You have to get people on the record. Now, like I said, it's a little bit different because I think the Democrats do it in this gun bill effort as just a facade. Whereas on our side, getting back to the principles I just talked about, if we were to write laws or repeal laws, or try to repeal laws according to our principles, even if it means they get struck down, it sends a message to conservatives, to your average conservative out there, that they're actually trying to do something. Too much, I think, on our side, on the Republican side, the conservative side, is based on, well, if we do this, is it going to pass or not? If it's not going to pass, then it's just a waste of time. Liberals don't think like that. They understand that it's just not about the goal, it's about the marketing of it. Putting these, even though these gun bills are going to fail, it's about the marketing. It's about getting that in the news that they're actually trying to do something. That's a good marketing tool for their causes. Whereas conservatives, we know we're not the greatest marketers of our ideas. Yes, we have talk radio. Yeah, we have a lot of successful websites and blogs, and of course, Red State Talk Radio and everything else. But we are a little, maybe sometimes a little too much goal-oriented, meaning if we can't reach that goal, there's no use doing it. Well, sometimes it's enough to try to do something and fail just because of the attention that it's going to get, that you can use in a future election or in a future bill that may come up. Got to remember that. But I got to go to the break. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.
The voice of American conservatism. WRS Digital, Red State Talk Radio.
And we are back at the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. Just wanted to make one more point about what I said before the break about how these liberals bring these gun control bills even though they won't pass. We have to get liberals on the record. See, when you do something like this and you only think that, well, they're just going to vote against it, so we might as well not even do it, what happens is then those liberals get out of putting their ideas out there. That they, whatever the repeal of some tax, changing of the regulations, or anything. When you don't force your enemy to make a decision on something, then that enemy can say or do anything that it wants. And conservatives have not gotten liberals on the record enough because of us all getting caught up in accomplishing goals. It's one of the main problems that I've had with my fellow conservatives and giving so much crap to John Boehner, and then Mitch McConnell. Of course, John Boehner's not around anymore. Is that so often we get too caught up in the results, when sometimes it's just about the process. The truth is, the Congress in the United States is not very conservative. Anybody will tell you that. The average conservative or average Republican in the Senate or House is probably 50 to 60% conservative. Probably. Now, given that, how conservative do you think they're going to be? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But you surely can't expect conservative goals all the time when those are the facts. Instead, what has happened is that John Boehner and Mitch McConnell, they get so much crap for not having more success. The only thing I would criticize them for is they don't do enough, they haven't done enough, or they didn't do enough of what liberals are doing here. Putting bills up and forcing the Democrat senators, Democrat congressmen to vote against it. Whatever that bill may be, whatever the topic may be. That would be my only criticism. But I'm not going to give them criticism for failing to get stuff passed. Because I realize John Boehner, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Speaker of the House, Majority Leader, they have a thankless job. It's trying like herd kittens. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. See, liberals, once again, they don't care about the herding of kittens because their congressmen and senators, they can kind of be just as bad. But they aren't worried about goals. They're only worried about the process. They're worried about the marketing. They're worried about the messaging. They're only worried about saying to their constituents, see what we're trying to do here? And whereas we need to think of it more that way. Stop thinking about, well, we didn't accomplish anything. We didn't get any laws passed. No conservative laws passed. John Boehner stinks. Paul Ryan stinks. Mitch McConnell stinks. It's more just about getting liberals on the record as being a bunch of people who are against liberty and freedom. That's what should be. If you don't think that you can get anything passed, it should be all about that. And once again, I think the conservative media has been duplicitous in making your average conservative think this way. Too many conservative leaders out here in the conservative media have been convincing Your average conservative, all they have to do is, well, they got a majority. They could do anything they want. Well, not really. And as much as we as conservatives and those Republicans who have said, well, Harry Reid got to do this and Harry Reid did that. And you know what? Democrats don't get a lot of things passed either. Yes, there was Obamacare. And every single Republican voted against it, and every single Democrat voted for it, and it got through. And there was even some finagling and cheating for stuff that went on there. But once again, all Democrats had to be on board to do it. Just not enough Republicans can get on board with a lot of the bills that pop up. Once again, I think because too many of them don't want to have on their record that they supported some bill and then it got voted down. That looks bad on their record. And in the end, it doesn't. As long as you're doing this on principle. As long as whatever the bill is that you're trying to make a law is based on principle. If it's just for marketing sake alone, then you're going to have problems. Whereas these gun bills that are being put up before the Congress today, although they are facade, they certainly do express the liberal position. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're a Republican or conservative and you're introducing some bill just because you think it's going to get passed, to put a feather in your cap, but it's not necessarily conservative, good luck with that. Good luck with that. So conservatives, even though we don't like anti-gun bills, we can learn a lot about what we should be doing, the process behind putting the opposition on the record. Granted, I think us going on, conservatives going on the record for being pro-gun helps us. Democrats don't think that way, but I'm not concerned about what they think. I'm only concerned about what we think. Let's move on to something else. The little guy. This is a little bit getting away from the Trump talk, but this does go to show you what happens to liberals and who they really are. Have you seen this story in New York City regarding Airbnb? If you don't know what Airbnb is, it is a company, it was a startup company, a tech startup company that has pulled together people all over the world, homeowners, apartment owners, that they can now rent out their places, a room, a section of their house to travelers for a certain amount of time. And they have an application you can get for your phone, so it hooks up people who are traveling with people who have private rooms and residences who are renting them out. And it's a big deal. It's taken a little while for Airbnb to get started. It's a fascinating story how these people were down to their last pennies trying to get this started. Then finally it started catching on. You can imagine it's not easy to start going up to people, to homeowners and saying, hey, we're trying to start this company where you can make money renting out rooms in your house to strangers. Not the greatest sales pitch in the world, but it's managed to catch on. And I have to admit, I've used Airbnb once when I went to a disc golf tournament in Estero, Florida. Was fine for me. Where I stayed, the people were perfectly friendly. In fact, the woman was a huge Kiss fan, so we talked a lot about that. But for me personally, it's a little weird staying in some stranger's house for me. It's just a little weird. I think that's more of a personality thing for me. I would rather have my own private room at a hotel. A motel. I've just discovered that. Other people don't feel that way. Well, in New York City, where Airbnb has been used, people have been using it to make money off their own private residences. It's now going to be a $1,000 fine if anybody rents a room to somebody for less than 30 days. Now, if you don't know, hopefully I don't have to tell you this, but let's just go on the record for this. New York City is run by liberals. In fact, some of the kookiest liberals you are ever going to find in the United States. There, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, we know where they are. But New York is definitely up there in the top 5. So all these regular people are making a couple bucks here and there, renting out their own private places that they bought at some point in the past, and now the city says, no, you can't allow people to stay in there. An Airbnb, you're not allowed to do business in this area unless you are providing a service where the person has to stay in that place for at least a month, 30 days. The argument that the Democrats are making in New York City is, well, the neighbors are getting a little suspicious and they don't want strangers living next to them. We just never know who's going to be next door. And I'm not going to say that I can't relate to that. Unfortunately, there have been a couple too many stories out there about how people have rented their home to somebody, a group, and then come back to find out that actually it was a porn production company, and there were naked women and men walking around out in the front yard, or there was some swingers party and there was kids next door. There are a few stories out there like that, and you can find them if you Google for them. However, it should be noted in the vast plan, the vast earth, 7 billion people, those stories don't account for, I'm going to say, even 0.1% of all of the Airbnb stays and business transactions that have happened. Those are just happen to be the ones that get attention because, in a way, they're a little funny, a little amusing, catches your attention. But the Democrats and liberals in New York City are using those stories as a reason to make this huge law and this huge fine, $1,000 fine in New York City. Now, you should know something, getting to the point of this. These are all little people, I guess you could say. Not Lilliputians, but the people who do this are not people of great, vast wealth or power. Just looking, they have an extra room somewhere. Maybe their daughter or son has gone off to college. Maybe they inherited a house that they can't sell right now. Grandparents died or something like that. And they're just looking to make a couple bucks here and there because of it. You can't do that now in New York City. You know who is going to benefit from this, and you know who was the main instigator for this in the first place, something that probably liberals in New York City don't want to talk about. The Hotel Trade Council was the financier, the lobbyist in this. Now, I could have sworn that Democrats hate corporations. And I could have sworn that liberals have gone on and on about how they hate big business, pushing around the little guy. I could have sworn it. But in this case, as you should know, it's also in the case of Uber and Lyft in these cities where they've gone in and then taxi cab companies start banging away at their liberal representatives or liberal council members in those cities. Like, I think one of those cities is Austin, Texas. Come on, Texas, you're better than that. So trying to get these couple of companies, once again, in that case, people using their private cars to pick up people and drive them just like a regular taxi service would be. But in this case, a person's using their private car. And once again, those liberals are going to point out those couple cases where, well, and there's that story that came out of, Michigan from like 6 months ago about that Uber driver that shot people while he was picking people up, which is still a bizarre story to me. They're going to harp on a story like that and say, see, these companies, they don't check out their employees enough. These people who they're, these private contractors that are doing this. They don't do background checks, or if they do background checks, things can be missed. And I've told you, this is something that those companies, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, these are stories and issues they're going to have to continue to deal with. All right, that's something that's not going away. I personally think that what they call the sharing economy, I think eventually it's going to go away. I think these things are they're going to be a little bit fad. Being that we just talked about disco, it's going to continue to, I think, get to that point where it's just a little bit of a fad and is never quite mainstream. Because there is something, I think, for a lot of people staying in strangers' houses, and do they have cameras, and we are being recorded, and that cuts both ways. So, but what's important here is that in case after case, where it has been the little guy with his car, the little guy with his apartment or his house, the liberals have taken the corporation side, the union side, the bureaucracy side, the side that wants to fine these people, to penalize these people for using their own private property, time after time after time. I think this has happened in my home city of Pittsburgh as well. There's looking to find. I think that Uber and Lyft are still in Pittsburgh, but it's been tough. And you've probably seen stories from in France and other countries where taxi drivers are getting ticked off at these Uber drivers for them allegedly stealing business. Well, the reason they're stealing business, taxi cab driver, is because your prices are inflated. Your wages are inflated. And if you like being a taxi driver, why don't you just forget that taxi job, go out and get your own car, and do like these people are doing? And in that way, I like what Airbnb and Lyft and Uber are doing, that they are undermining these protected industries. Even though I myself probably prefer a hotel over staying in somebody's house. I can admit that. But in the United States, we should have the freedom to do with our personal property what we want, as long as we are not infringing on somebody else's rights. And dare I say it, you don't have a right to be in the hotel business. You don't have a right to be in the taxi cab business and then protect other people from getting into it. But those liberals, man, every time this comes up, they just love going along with the big companies. And getting back to what I talked about with conservatives and not introducing enough bills to put liberals on the record, would be a good way to point that out. Because here's what I know. I have liberals in my life. I know liberals. And here's what I know. Some of them use Uber and Lyft and Airbnb. I know they do. They've talked about it. So if regular, everyday liberals are using the services, but liberal politicians are fighting against those services, that is something that should be more front and center for those liberals who enjoy those services. You know that person you voted for 2 years ago? They actually hate that service that you like. They hate that company that you like. What do you think about that? See, it's little things like that I think that can turn the tide our way. Granted, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, right now in the United States, not even one of the top 30 most important political topics in the United States right now. But those stories can start to work their way into liberals' heads. It doesn't have to be terrorism or gun control or environmentalism you use to change liberals' minds. It could be something as simple as a story like this that gets people thinking. We as conservatives, we have to remember that. Let's move on to something else. I saw this story of Barack Obama. Have you noticed, we don't like to talk about this on the Dentzel domain, but have you noticed that Barack Obama's approval numbers have been going up? And at Fox News, they think they have the reason, and unfortunately, I think I have to agree with them. The reason his numbers are going up is probably because the prospects of who our next president is going to be are quite dismal. We know what the favorable, unfavorable ratings are of Donald Trump, and we know what the favorable, unfavorable ratings are of Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, even though it sounds like Barack Obama is going to go out and campaign with Hillary Clinton once she is officially the nominee. These presidential nominees are making Barack Obama look good, and that's scary. Now, I have to admit, I think there's something else going on here, and it's kind of the polar opposite of that. And I predicted this a while ago. I haven't talked about it recently, is that I predicted that Barack Obama's approval ratings would start to go up the closer and closer it got to the end of his administration. Granted, at that time, I had no idea who the nominees were going to be on the Democrat and Republican side, and that was not even, so it couldn't even be factored in. But I thought his approval ratings would go up just simply because people would be glad that he's leaving. And I happen to believe, let's just say this for a moment. Let's say that Barack Obama could run for a third term. He'd probably get elected. Just like Bill Clinton probably could have gotten reelected in 2000. Just like Ronald Reagan could have gotten reelected in 1988, although I'm pretty sure George W. Bush couldn't get reelected in 2008. In any case. But he would probably get less votes now than even he got in 2012. We know that he got about 4 to 5 million less of the popular vote in 2012 compared to 2008. He'd probably get 2 or 3 million less than that if he could run this time. So overall, he's gotten more unpopular as he's continued. Unfortunately, you'd like to think that a Republican nominee would have been able to beat him this time around, given everything. If Donald Trump were running against Barack Obama would beat Donald Trump worse than I think Hillary or Bernie's going to. Easily worse. It wouldn't even be close. So there's that. But I do think that Fox News is getting, I think, partially correct. Maybe I'm a little biased, being that I'm a never Trump, never Hillary, never Bernie guy. And they're getting correct in that compared to them, Barack Obama looks pretty good. But I think there's also this idea, I think there's a lot of people who are just ready to move on. For me, of course, I'm ready to move on. Just don't like the prospects of what's going to happen. But the reason I'm ready to move on is I want to see what kind of ex-president Barack Obama is going to be. I've told you, I think he is going to be the loudest-mouthed, foulest, most rude ex-president there are going to be. He's going to make Jimmy Carter look like George W. Bush has been for the last 8 years. And we know how Jimmy Carter has been. Criticizing this, criticizing that, being kooky. Barack Obama is going to be that times 10. And he's going to be that way no matter what party gets the White House this next time, whether it's Hillary or anybody else. Barack Obama is going to be out there trolling the President of the United States every single day. That's what I can't wait for, that part of it. But I got to go. EdwardDentzel.com is where you can find all of my old Red State Talk radio shows. You can also find them at SoundCloud, Podbean, Podomatic, and YouTube. You can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn. Email me, EdwardDentzel@Reagan.com. Twitter, Dentzel Domain, all one word, no space in between. EdwardDentzel.com/book. You can download for free the first chapter of my next book called The Comebacks. I told you at the beginning of the show about my other show, America's Missing Podcast, with my co-host Melissa Bridges. We have a new case out this week. I urge you to look for it at Podomatic and iTunes. The topic is the disappearance of Jesse Ross. It's been a pleasure talking to you tonight. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.